gurus, gimmicks, and depression medication. None of these things worked to help save Ray's life. In this week's episode of the podcast, Ray is interviewed by New York Times best-selling author and co-author of Ray's new book, Jeff Goins, on how, of all things, a sales letter helped save Ray's life and how you can save yours with his new book, Read This or Die.
This is a book that we worked on together. I always let the author, the client, which is you, define what that working relationship looks like. People are sometimes hesitant to use the term ghostwriter. The industry term is technically collaborator or sometimes writer, but you and I partnered together to write your story about getting Parkinson's, starting with the diagnosis, all the way through denial of the diagnosis, seeking a number of faith healers and positive thinking solutions to sort of cure yourself out of it. When that didn't work, you needed another solution, and you turned back to a very old ally, which was the ally of direct response copywriting, and you wrote yourself a sales letter. My first question, I suppose, now that we've warmed up our voices, is, I remember almost probably 3 years ago now, maybe longer. It was summertime, and you and I were having sort of a discovery conversation about the possibility of you working with a traditional publisher about a new book idea, and I was really pushing you beyond just, copywriting or marketing or online business. And we eventually landed on a book about beliefs that became a book about persuading yourself to live a better life. And this, I think, is the most vulnerable work that you've done. And I'm wondering how you feel almost on the eve of the launch of this project that took 3 years to put together, that we started before there was a pandemic and have finished after there was, a post-pandemic world now. We've all changed a lot. You've changed a lot. This is a lot of your life story. There's a lot of questions and wrestlings in the book. You mentioned via text the other day about feeling some level of vulnerability hangover. I know that there have been moments throughout the book writing process where we've both kind of wondered how vulnerable we want to go with the content. How do you feel now about it?
I feel good about it, mostly. I still have a bit of a taste of that hangover every now and then. Yeah. For me, what that means is I'll be rereading a passage and I'll see something I've written, and I just have this moment of, should I have said that? The real rush of that hangover came when my wife, who didn't read any of the drafts, I asked her, do you want? She said, nope. Let me know when it's finished. Wow. So I gave her the PDF copy that the publisher sent you and I, and she read it. And about halfway through, she walked into the kitchen where I was sitting drinking coffee, and she said, you really were very open in this, weren't you? And I said, yes. She said, I'll let you know what I think. And she finished the book later that day, and she said, I understand why. I said, I kind of wish I could go back and make some revisions, but I'm not even going to suggest them. And she felt good about it. We've had some of the best vulnerable conversations in our relationship as a result of this book. Wow. So as much as I feel like some of it would conflict with my previous self and his very strategic way of thinking about what information I put out publicly, I'm happy with what we've done.
Good. I was happy that you were that vulnerable. How would you describe our working relationship in regards to this book?
I didn't really know we were having a discovery conversation. We had that first conversation. So well done. It felt like two friends talking.
Mm-hmm.
It often felt like that during the process. It sometimes felt like you were more my coach. Sometimes it felt like you were my therapist. I don't know if sometimes you felt like you were my therapist, but I mean, I was unraveling a lot of things as we went through the process of writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
I do think you said earlier, we partnered together to write this story, write this book. And that's how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
Collaborated. Makes it sound like we're part of a rebellion, some kind of underground movement. But I feel very much like it was a partnership. And I'm so thankful that if I was going to do this kind of thing with anyone, I did it with you, because I respect you as an author. I respect you as a friend and as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been a much poorer book had we not worked together on it.
Had you worked with other writers in the past on your previous books?
No, because I know now, because of my insecurity. One of my favorite sayings was, I don't write by committee, which was really saying, I now realize I don't want anybody to critique what I've written.
Oh.
So I've become quite different now.
Mm-hmm.
People on my team probably get tired of me sending them things saying, give me some feedback on this.
And would you do it again? Would you work with a writer, with a collaborator again in the future?
100%. If it was the right project and the right person, yes.
Mm-hmm. What was the best part about this process for you?
It was you challenging me to tell the truth.
Without that, what kind of book do you think you would have written?
Something more strategic, business wise, to get me more business, and something less helpful to the reader. I feel really great about this book because I know it's going to help people who are dealing with intolerable, impossible situations in their life, don't know quite how to address it. And it's also going to help people with maybe less dramatic circumstances, but for somebody who wants to get control of their eating or how much doom scrolling they're doing on the internet, there are tools in the book that'll help them to do that too. So I think it'll help people. I want to write useful, helpful books.
Talk about that, because I think we didn't actually know this going into the book writing process. We knew you had a fascinating story of getting Parkinson's, getting really depressed as a result of it, and then using that crisis as the impetus for changing your life. You lost a bunch of weight, got out of a bunch of debt, gained control of your life, when you really could have just kind of given up, right? You were giving a terminal diagnosis. This is a disease, barring any, miraculous cure or something unexpected happening, that will eventually kill you. And it's a degenerative disease, makes your life progressively worse. And yet, in many ways, it made your life better. But it wasn't just, I have a disease now that's, making it difficult for me to sit still or whatever, or sleep through the night. My life is suddenly better. It was just that it was sort of a wake up call to you, culminating in you writing yourself a sales letter. What do you hope a person gets out of a book like this?
I hope that as you read the book, you'll begin to realize that the world, your experience of life, really springs out of the story you tell yourself about your life. And you can choose the story. You can choose to have the tragic, depressed horror story that you may imagine in your most catastrophizing moments, or you might see something better. I personally saw a world where I was more empathetic, more understanding, more patient, first with myself and then with others. And it changed me.
In the book, there's at least one of those wake-up call moments where, as I recall, you and your wife are traveling around the country in an RV, seeking out these different Christian faith healers, trying to get healed of Parkinson's. And and it's not working. And then I think it's around that time you guys just, go on a trip, you go camping somewhere, and you were just bereft, super depressed, and nothing's working. Your life is a mess. It's getting progressively worse. And your wife comes to you guys, and you guys have a tough conversation
where she says, we need to talk.
Mm-hmm.
You always know it's going to be a good conversation when it starts like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she sat very close to me. She said, I need you to pull your head out of your ass. There are people who are counting on you, and you can't keep playing the victim. So that was fun to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But I needed to hear it. And at that time, she was probably the only person who could have said it to me and got my attention. And I'd like to tell you that I instantly changed. I was instantly successful.
Right.
Tony Robbins style. But that's not how it happened. But that was the moment that I awakened to the fact of what I was doing.
Yeah. And I think, the argument of the book is that's not how change happens. Change is this progressive process of you persuading yourself through your own words or through the words of other people. But at the end of the day, it's always you who are persuading yourself to change, even if you're seemingly letting someone else do it. It's you kind of finding the right motivation, finding the right pain, turning up the volume on that pain, and then sort of forcing action on yourself to the point that it becomes a habit. And that's the process of selling anything, right?
Right. It's psychology. It's fairly basic psychology, but I created a framework we use in our advertising and copywriting business to persuade people to buy things. And I had that moment of realization. I need to persuade me now. Now I'm the one who I need to write myself a sales letter. And when I first had that thought, it was a metaphorical thought. And I realized, no, it's not a metaphor. I'm going to do it. And you did.
And you literally did that.
Yeah.
Where and when and how did you do that? I mean, the actual sales letter is in the book, which is, you're not gentle with yourself in this sales letter in terms of selling yourself on the promise of a better life. You have this conversation with your wife, and then the sales letter happens when?
I think that would have been around 2014, 2015. And that's when things began. That catalyzed me making changes then, because one of the things I talked to myself about in the letter, I said, you're going to be fat, miserable, sick, and you're going to die. And so I started with the weight, and I lost over 60 pounds. And it wasn't through some miracle pill or something. It was through the very grievously difficult process of eating less of the stuff I loved, like pie and ice cream and pizza, and exercising. But now I had the motivation to do it, which was internally created motivation, which is really the only kind that works over time. And I began changing the way I used my money, my time, my talent. And, this is going to come as a shock to you. I still have some challenges. I'm not perfect, but life is much better. And believe it or not, I'm a much less stressed out human being most of the time.
You wrote this sales letter called Read This or Die. It was based on a very famous sales letter of the same title, written by a legend, a legend in the copywriting world. Talk about that original Read This or Die letter, because I didn't know this.
Yeah, Jim Rutz is a famous copywriter in that world, and he wrote a sales letter for a product that was being sold by a company promoting health products. Like they're ultimately were promoting vitamins and things like that. And that was his headline. It was actually a magalog, which
what is that?
It's a magazine that sells.
Why like the selling products in it?
Yeah, it's like a catalog, but it looks like a magazine. And it used to be a really big thing. They still do it, but it's not nearly as effective as it used to be, except for people who are like 80 years old now. But that was the title on the front page of this quote magazine: "Read This or Die." And it's funny because any copywriter or marketer I tell the title of my book, they laugh. They say, "Oh, great title." So yes, Jim passed away a few years ago. We actually became good friends. I met him at a seminar of internet marketers. He was this older gentleman sitting at the back. Nobody was paying attention to. I sat down next to him and he said, "Hi, I'm Jim Rutz." And I was a total geek. I'm like, "Not the Jim Rutz." And he laughed and he said, "Well, it depends on what you mean by that." I said, "Read this or die." He said, "Yes, that is me." And he was delighted somebody remembered his work, and we developed a friendship and talked a lot over the next few years on the phone. So it's fun to be able to give a tip of the hat to him with the title of the book.
It's yeah, and there's very kind and gracious acknowledgement at the beginning of the book about that. It's a funny thing being a writer and probably also being in radio. People don't always recognize you by your face. I've had that experience in Nashville. You know, I've got some friends who are DJs for local radio stations, and I'll meet them in person. I'll be like, "You don't," because the voice
sound.
No, it's never the case. You know, what is the saying? You got a face for radio or something like that. Yeah. So you wrote this sales letter, and I guess what I'm curious about is, obviously I'm familiar with the book. I need to give it a refresher read myself. Where did that letter that you wrote to yourself end up, and how did you use it over the months and years that followed to motivate yourself? And is it something, as you've experienced, challenges since then, that you've pulled out and reread at any point?
Yeah, I do reread it. I rewrite it once a year.
Oh, okay.
So I've actually replaced my goal setting methodology with that. I just look at my goals from last year and I look at what I accomplished or didn't accomplish, decide what the few things I want to accomplish this coming year are, what are the most important things. And I just go back and start writing another sales letter. During the time I wrote this, I didn't know I was going to do that. So at first it was a couple of years before I rewrote it. I kept it, because I'm a geek, I kept it in Evernote. And I would review it. At first I reviewed it daily. Then honestly, it became so routine of just glancing through it. So I did it monthly. And whenever I needed a reminder, when the dieting got hard or the work I was doing to pay back all the debt got tough, I pulled it back out and just reconnected with all those feelings that I had when I wrote that. Because it's a very emotional letter. And it's, as you said, it's not easy. I wouldn't actually write a letter like this to my customers. It's too brutal. It's too honest with, here's your problem.
Yeah.
You're lazy. You're undisciplined. You live in a fantasy world. Get your head out of your ass and fix this stuff. Couldn't fix Parkinson's, so I had to fix me instead.
Yeah. And that is the crux of the book. There's that Viktor Frankl quote, when a man cannot change his circumstances, he is forced to change himself. And that's what the book is about. It's about you changing your approach to the world and your perspective on it so that your experience of it could dramatically change. And I love the technology of using a sales letter. I think it's fun. You said you were more brutal with yourself than you ever would have been with a customer or a client. What is the power of a person reading their own words reflected back to them, telling the hard truth?
I think it's hard to overestimate that because, we mentioned Tony Robbins earlier. He has this thing he says frequently. I'm sure many people have heard it before. He says the most powerful force in human psychology is our need to be consistent with our self-created identity.
Wow. Yeah, and totally.
That's the power of a sales letter where you're brutally honest with yourself about what needs to change, what needs to happen. If you're as truthful as you can be, and I feel I was very direct in that sales letter I wrote to myself. When you read it back, you realize I meant this. This is truth for me. And it put more pressure on me to change than anything else I had ever experienced. Because it was like the secret. We have the public self, we have the more private self, then we have our secret self, which we don't we don't usually share that with people because we're afraid if they know our secret self, they won't like us anymore. At least that's my experience. Probably I'm the only one.
What was the worst part of working on this book for you?
Somewhere in the middle. Because we had done all this writing and then we kind of redirected, and I felt like it was just a big jumbled mess. And I didn't know how a book was going to come out of this. It was more of a discovery process than I expected.
Did you ever wonder if it was going to be completed?
Oh, only about 117 times.
So, the process of writing this book is you and I did a lot of interviews, you and I and Liz, my assistant at the time, and the person who helped me kind of launch this ghostwriting agency. And we were just trying to get all of the material out of you, the whole story, and kind of figure out what it is and how it works. I mean, the book isn't quite memoir, but there's lots of stories from your life and then lessons that fit into this pastor paradigm, which is your copywriting framework. And I don't know that we knew, how it was going to shape up exactly. When you and I would talk, I'd kind of go away and work on some stuff and then bring it back to you and let you read it in chunks of the book. And I remember towards the end, one, being amazed how fast of a reader you are. You'd read the whole book like overnight or in like a day or two. And you'd go, hey, that's pretty good. Or I want to change, these two things. It was minimal edits. And I believed that you read the book, but I was also like, really? Like, and I guess I'm wondering, what was it like to read your story kind of put together by somebody else? I mean, those were your words, but I'm filling things in. And a great example is that line that you said Cliff read back to you. What was it? You can only accomplish the impossible when you're facing, what was it?
The intolerable.
The intolerable, right? I can't remember if that's something you said or something that came up in the midst of writing down the words that you were saying, or some combination of both. And that is an interesting aspect of this kind of partnership. Is I don't know who wrote what. It's not really the point. We were building a book together. But were there moments when you're reading it where you were tempted to go, no, I want to change this and this, and I don't know about that? And like, what was that like for you to just go, no, it's good, or let's not say this, but the rest of it's pretty good? Because I experienced in like the last 25% of the book, you being pretty trusting of the process and lightly touching the book. That's not always the case.
Yeah, it was scary for me at first, but then I began to experience that thing you're just talking about, where you'd send something back to me and I'd read it, and I did read it every time. Because I felt like, well, this is going to have my name on it. So I'm saying every word. Mm-hmm. And you did such a great job of working with the stories and the conversations that we had. I often didn't know. I'd read something, I'd think, man, that was really good. I guess Jeff wrote that. And then I'd go back and sometimes I'd discover, well, it's something I said that you maybe took it verbatim. Maybe you massaged it and made it better. But as the longer we worked together, the more I trusted the process. And yes, every time you sent me something, I would read it, and there were times I would think, oh, I don't know if I want to say that. But then I started asking myself, why don't I want to say it? Is it because it's not how I want to say it, or is it because I'm worried about what's going to happen if I say this? And then I asked myself, is this true? Is it important to the point of the book? Mm-hmm. And that's why it was lightly touched.
My experience, there were sort of three Rays in the writing process. There was the Ray that you were before we started writing the book, and really the story that you wanted to tell about that transformation that happened in 2014, 2015 and beyond. And we were working on this in 2019, 2020 through 2021. And then editing thereafter. And every time you sort of reconnected with the book, you were kind of a different character. Here's the Ray that experiences, we want to tell a story about him. Then there was the person that you were in like 2019, 2020, and you had a lot of stuff going on in your life at that point. You were bunch of stuff was happening with Parkinsons, a bunch of surgeries. There was some business stuff happening, pandemic, all that stuff. So there was kind of like the in-between Ray. And then there was, like the post-pandemic Ray. And I found that every time you approached the book, you were coming at it from a different perspective. And I remember you saying things like, this sounds too nihilistic. Let's get rid of this. I don't want to, come across as some sort of like, everything is meaningless kind of person. And I thought that was good, but I was also like, I mean, you said that, I just wrote it down, or I was channeling the vibe that I felt when you said this thing, that was 8 months ago now. What was the process like for you of sort of telling part of your life story? I mean, this is a good chunk of your life is in here, because we go all the way back to childhood and how you got into persuasion and copywriting in the first place. What is it like to be a person who's continually changing, trying to tell a story about a thing that happened in your life at one point, with the understanding that since then you've continued to evolve and transform? It's hard because you could just keep rewriting it forever,
Yeah. Oh boy, do I know that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it gave me a lot more self-awareness, because I did say those things, and I went through this period where I was definitely very nihilistic.
Mm-hmm.
And now that only happens like once a day. But I did change, and I've learned to be, I had to figure out how to let that truth come through without filtering it too much. Although I know there were some cases where I was like, I don't want to say it exactly that way, but lightly, I think. I don't think I interfered too much with the process we were going through. I wanted to tell the truth about being in those places, in those moments. And it was interesting to have the time that we did to work on it, although we didn't plan on originally taking that long, I think.
No.
But it was good. And, part of me, no, I don't wish it turned out differently, because after we turned the book in, the final edition of the book, during that period where we were finishing it up, my Parkinson's was getting worse and worse and worse. And to the point that I could barely walk, couldn't feed myself, couldn't button my own shirt. And I ended up having brain surgery this past December, like 5 months ago. And a month after the brain surgery, they switched on the neurostimulators, which changed my life. And I actually am pleased that it happened the way it did on the timeline, because I didn't know that was coming when we finished the book. So I think the book still comes across as hopeful and helpful, even though I was experiencing some of the most challenging moments of my life. And then, because I had changed my own mindset, I had the courage to go through with the brain surgery, and it did get better.
Why do you think when people are facing something like a terminal illness, they turn to make it go away sort of solutions, i.e. go get healed by some evangelist, or, repeat this mantra, and you can heal yourself. Before we started chatting, I was showing you an old version of the Think and Grow Rich book by Napoleon Hill that I have. And I think you and I still, in certain aspects of our lives, subscribe to pieces of those ideologies. I mean, but you were all in on this stuff that you could, if you believed it strong enough, if you thought it enough times, if you repeated it enough, you could make this thing go away. And that just didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is it? Why do people do that in the first place? Why did you do that in the first place? Why was it? Why is that attractive in the first place? And what is it in the human psyche that makes us hold on to seemingly improbable things versus facing the facts of reality?
Well, I think because reality is hard. It's it's beautiful, but it's also terrible.
Mm-hmm.
We all know we're going to die intellectually, but we don't act as though we believe it. I think I can only speak for me. I can't speak for people. I can speak for Ray, though. I can tell you that I knew I was going to die, but I also knew I was going to go to heaven and I was going to be perfected and that all my troubles would go away and they wipe away all my tears. I'd never cry again. And then I thought I could have that on earth as well. I think that's the fantasy. We can wave a magic wand or say some magic words or join somebody's magic club and wear their pointy hat and everything will be fixed. It'll be fairy tale and we'll live happily ever after. But I don't think it really works that way. So the more challenging quest to go on for me is, well, how do I enjoy life and have the best life I can? Not my best life now, but my best life that I'm able to have and make the most of it while I'm here. That's a harder pill to swallow because it doesn't offer overnight success.
Are you still tempted to search for a magic solution?
Oh, occasionally.
Yeah, me too.
Only about once a day.
It's tempting, there's that inner child or something in you that's sort of petulant. That's like, I don't want this, I want that, And when my kids pull that with me, I go, I know. I totally get it. I totally get wanting to play video games all day long or,
Like I just read this book called Dianetics. I'm joking. Kidding.
I literally forgot about that book, but you remember those commercials, in like the 80s and 90s.
Page 458.
Dianetics.
Yeah.
There's like a volcano exploding behind it for some reason.
I bought that book because of those commercials back then.
I think lots of people did. I think it's a good book. And I think what's cool about it is it has its own little cheat sheet, write yourself a sales letter. Here's a version of it. And here's a bunch of stories to support it. But the real transformation is you telling yourself what you really need to do to change your life. And as that Tony Robbins quote says, it's one, there's no arguing with you telling yourself the hard truth about your life. You can't you can argue with anybody else, even if they're right. But when you are telling you this, it does kind of create some dissonance,
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to ignore yourself when you know you're right.
Totally. Because you don't want to say you're wrong. Because who is telling whom that they're wrong? And how could they? Right. Maybe they're wrong. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's that simple. Everybody that I know that's changed their life significantly has done this, even if they didn't write it down.
Exactly.
They just kind of faced the facts and then they took back control of their life and started changing things. And that's what I found most inspiring about the process of working on this with you is there are some things that I know I need to change. I'm looking for other people to tell me the stuff that I know is true. And I just need to do it. And even if it's not true, I believe it's true. I've created this identity and I'm living not in alignment with that identity. And it's causing a lot of dissonance. And so I either need to align myself or create a new, self-identity because this is hell, living disintegrated with who I think and know I should be. That's hard.
Yeah. I think most of the time, and maybe not always, because therapy is a good thing. Trauma is a real thing. But most of us, I think we know what's true and what we need to do. I think most of us know what the real problem is, whatever that may be for anybody who's thinking about this. It's hard to tell yourself the truth. And then once you've done it though, it's hard to forget it.
That's true. Yeah. There's a quote in the book that you shared, which is, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off.
Yeah. Almost without fail.
Yeah. And that seems to be the discomfort of change. There's a reason why, when I'm wrestling with my weight, I don't want to step on the scale.
Right.
No, I'm fine.
Or when I'm dealing with money problems, I don't want to look at my credit card statement.
Yeah. Or I don't know that I'm dealing with money problems because I'm so far in denial. I know that I have money problems when I haven't looked at my bank account for, several days in a row. Running a business that, the undulations of cash flow, especially when you're doing service work for people, you can go from a very large number in your bank account to a very large negative number in your bank account in a matter of days sometimes. And so, my discipline, and I really did learn this in part from working on this book with you, is to just face the hard things often, and so I'm looking at that bank account once a day, not in some sort of anxious thing, but just sort of as a way to discipline myself to
keep track of the truth.
Keep track of the truth, not live in my story about how things are going. Because I can go in the disaster catastrophizing direction or in the heaven on earth direction. And neither of those is true. Those are just stories. And I really did learn that from working on this book with you. And I think that the gift of this book and the gift of you writing it when you did, and I imagine this is maybe a challenge to one of your former identities, is that that's the real medicine of the book. Is it's not that you, Ray Edwards, accomplished the impossible, therefore we all can do it. It's that this is a tool that I use to keep track of the truth, because I found that whenever I was living in my story of reality, every once in a while reality would disrupt that story. And all I'm trying to do is live in alignment with the truth and not assume that I know exactly what that is. And this is a helpful tool to stay rooted in what's true and what I want to be true, because I do have some agency over this life of mine and what I do with it. And what I like about the book is it's just this, beautiful story and a series of lessons of one man earnestly wrestling with, here's what I want to be true. Here's what is true. And here's what I can do about it.
Well said.
Well said to you as well. What do you want to be true about this book after people read it?
I want them to have been helped by it. I want them to actually do something. Even if you don't write a letter, if you just think about writing a letter, I'd prefer you write one. But I'd love it if people told themselves the truth and made a change that made their quality of life better. And I'd love for that to happen for as many people as it can. Obviously, I want to sell as many books as possible, but it's more about, it's less about making money selling books, which, is a great way to get rich. Experience in life. But I really want it to make a difference, a positive difference for people. And I believe it will.
Yeah, me too. This was one of those, I think every book affects me in some way, but this affected me more than most. I carried around your story for many years and continue to do so. And there were moments of deep empathy. I mean, the story goes dark in places. And I think more than once reached out to you and just was like, hey man, like I just, I feel all this. This is a lot. And you were very vulnerable and honest. And that affected me profoundly. And it called attention to my own challenges and my own lack of integrity in places where I wasn't living in alignment with the person I wanted to be. And I think that's, the gift of the book is it wakes us up to what's true in our own lives and the areas that we might not be willing to face, but need to face.
Yeah, that's the hard work. I appreciate you sharing all that. It really had a deep impact on me just working together, whether we even published the book or not. It had a deep impact on me as well.
Yeah.
And I think it made us, I always said we were friends before we did this. I feel like we're really friends. Either we're going to be friends when this is finished or we're never going to speak to one another again. I'm glad it turned out we're still friends.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for writing this book and inviting me into the process. It was fun and interesting and challenging and enlightening for me. I spent many a late night working with your words, your story, trying to communicate that in a way that would connect with other people, that would hopefully lead to some of the, similar changes or their own version of changes that you had made. And the process was, I was like, oh, there's some changes that I need to make too.
So you're the first one.
I'm the one. You did it.